Record. Hi everyone, I'd like to thank everybody who's joining us today. Welcome to today's CNCF webinar, which is on the End User Technology Radar for September 2020 on observability. I'm Cheryl Hung, I'm the VP of Ecosystem at the CNCF, and I will be moderating today's webinar. And we'd like to welcome our presenters today, Kunal Parmar, who's Director of Software Development at Box, Marcin Suterski, who is Software Architect at the New York Times, Jason Tarasovic, who is Principal Engineer at payitgov.com, and Jon Moter, who's Senior Principal Engineer at Zendesk. A few housekeeping items before we get started. So during the webinar, you're not able to talk as an attendee, but there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to drop your questions in there and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. This is an official webinar of the CNCF and as such is subject to the CNCF Code of Conduct. Please do not add anything to the chat or to questions that would be in violation of the Code of Conduct. Basically just be respectful to all of your fellow participants and presenters. Please also note that the recording and slides will be posted later today to the CNCF webinar page at cncf.io/webinars. And with that, I'm going to kick off today's presentation. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. So as I've already said, today's webinar is going to be about the End User Technology Radar. So I'm Cheryl. Basically, I work with end users. So end users are companies who are not selling any cloud native products or services, but helping them get active and involved with the open source community and get engaged with meeting each other. This is the people I mean by the CNCF End User Community. So there's more than 140 companies. They span finance and retail and software and so many other things. And all of these companies are using Kubernetes and other cloud native projects. So today I'm really happy to have with me some representatives from the end user community. And I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves one by one. So first off, we have Jon. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jon Moter. I'm a senior principal engineer at Zendesk. I work in what's called the foundation organization or foundation engineering organization in Zendesk. We provide compute, storage, infrastructure, all the technologies and tools needed for the rest of the Zendesk engineering org to deploy and run their applications. Been working with Kubernetes and cloud native technologies for probably about 5 years now, right around the time that Kubernetes first came out. And I've been part of the CNCF end user group for, I don't know, probably 3 years now, I think. So yeah, nice to meet you.
Cool, thank you, Jon. Next up, Kunal.
Hey everyone, my name is Kunal. I'm a director at Box. I'm in the backend organization where my team is responsible for the platform that the rest of the engineering team uses to run all of our applications on. And so, we are responsible for everything from Kubernetes to service mesh to observability. Box and myself have been involved with the CNCF and the tools in this space as well from the very beginning. We were very early adopters of Kubernetes. And also we've been part of the CNCF end user community, I think from the very beginning as well. So I've been involved in all the end user meetings and everything. So nice to meet everyone here.
Cool, thank you. Marcin, you're up.
Okay, my name is Marcin Suterski. I'm a lead engineer at the New York Times. I work on a team called Deliver Engineering. We are essentially trying to enable other development teams and engineering teams at the organization to do whatever they need to get done for the business. So we're providing them with tools, different processes, and a lot of education. And my focus currently on the team is observability.
Fantastic. And Jason?
Hello, I'm Jason. I started the platform engineering organization at Payit, and up until recently led that team. And we were responsible for our Kubernetes infrastructure, which we managed ourselves. We run in AWS's GovCloud, so there was no EKS until very, very recently. And we, provide the platform for our engineering teams to be able to deliver our solution to our government partners.
Awesome. I want to thank all four of you for joining me today and for working with me on this radar to represent the whole of the CNCF end user community. So we're going to launch into the radar itself. So Technology Radar is an opinionated guide to a set of emerging technologies. So this is the second time that we've run the CNCF End User Technology Radar, where we survey the different companies in the end user community and ask them to report what solutions they're using and whether they would recommend them to other people effectively. So there's three levels that we have. One is adopt, meaning we clearly recommend it, we've used it for a long time, it's stable. Secondly is trial, which is we've used it with some success. So we can recommend it, but maybe it's only applicable for certain use cases, or we only use it in certain ways. And then the third level is called assess. So assess is we've tried it out, we think it's promising, and we recommend that you take a look at it. And then each technology radar is accompanied by some themes, which is anything that the radar team thought was interesting or unexpected or noteworthy about what they saw. So as a reminder, this is the second time we've done it. The first time was on continuous delivery, which was in June. So we're going to keep publishing these once per quarter. So first question. So obviously it's from the title, you know already that we chose observability for this radar. Marcin, maybe you can lead us off. Why do you find observability interesting?
I think it's really difficult to run any business or an organization without knowing how it's doing, and having an insight into the processes, the products, and engagement with users, for example, is essential to be successful. And given that we are all running systems and providing features and products to users, it's important for us to provide them in a reliable way and understand how we're doing. And as you know, the landscape, including CNCF products, sort of exploded recently. There's many things to look at and be interested in. So, you know, starting with metrics, logs, traces, there's many things to analyze, to collect, and to measure. And there's also many different things encapsulated in the observability, from tools to different protocols, to different processes, to different ways of collecting all of those things. So I feel like that this is something that everyone could benefit from knowing how other people are doing, and we chose to talk about it and give it a try.
Awesome. I know this is what you do in your day-to-day at the New York Times as well, so definitely interesting for you.
Exactly.
Jon, what about you? Do you have any thoughts about choosing observability?
Oh, yeah, just for everyone watching, this started, Cheryl invited us to be part of this radar team. And it's not like she or anyone else came with us with a topic or an agenda or anything like that. We just started with a conversation about like, all right, what would be both interesting to us and would we think would be interesting to the larger community? We just bounced ideas back and forth and tried a few things. And observability seemed like something like Marcin said, it is both universal, like you can't a company can't run and be successful without in some way observing the state of their servers, their users, and that sort of thing. It's something that we all need to struggle with. And there's also been a lot of change and development. Like when I first started at Zendesk 5 years ago, there were the set of tools available for us to do it is very different than what we have today. So it's both a important, universal, and sort of like a dynamic field that at least we've been experimenting a lot with. And I think it'd be interesting to compare notes with both the other people on the team and the larger community.
Cool. I'll give it to Kunal next.
Yeah, I think similar to what Marcin and John have mentioned, from my perspective, there's been an kind of rapid increase in the cloud native space, lot of adoption of the new tools, the new technologies, and the new kind of paradigm in which developers are writing code and operating their code in. And a lot of them are choosing like a microservices based architecture. That's kind of what's become the norm. And in this kind of, massively distributed system, observability is really, really important. I mean, day in and day out, we rely on our observability for us to make sure we're serving all of our customers. And I'm sure everybody here also feels the same way. And so from that perspective, having a better understanding of what does the landscape look like for observability, understanding what our peers in the end user community are using and finding helpful for their own needs is very compelling for us to know, so that we can understand how to chart our journey forward and what tools, technologies can we take advantage of. So this was very, very relevant for us and very important. And we figured it's going to be the same for all the other end users as well as the new people coming into the cloud native space. So that's kind of one of the reasons from my perspective why this is a very interesting radar to choose.
Cool, thank you, Kunal. Jason.
Yeah, I think the topic of observability made a lot of sense. It seemed both timely. I think this is something that is top of mind in a lot of organizations. It seemed like there were a lot of projects, open source and closed projects, standards, vendors, like software as a service type solutions. So it seemed like we really could, have a really meaty topic where we could dig into it and learn something.
Cool. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Observability is one of the fundamental parts of cloud native. I don't think you can say you're doing cloud native if you don't have an observability solution somewhere in your stack. So we actually went ahead and asked the end user companies what observability solutions they use. So just to give you a quick view of the kinds of companies that responded, you've got some logos you can look at here. These are the companies' sizes by the number of employees, the total number of employees. So you can see that there's probably maybe 50-50, maybe slight bias towards the 1,000 employee plus, so mid to large size companies. And then the companies that were represented were across a range of different industries. Software is a bit, I'm not quite sure what that means, but you can see the rest is quite a widespread across different industries. John, did you want to add anything before I move on?
Oh yeah, and just one note about as we start to get into the some of the actual numbers here. So yeah, we canvassed 32 companies. We set effectively like a survey or a spreadsheet. So we did not have like in-depth scientific interviews with like a super deep analysis here. So, and there were a larger number of technologies that companies brought up than are represented here. So you might be asking yourself, hey, why isn't so-and-so here? Like the lack of something in here does not necessarily mean it's like, it's not used, we don't like it, but we needed to kind of winnow down to an interesting and useful set of things to have opinions on. So this is by no means attempting to be an exhaustive, authoritative view of the entire, 32 companies is not the entire industry. But from the data we did see, we're highlighting a couple of interesting bits of information.
Yeah, I think the more interesting analysis will come in 6 months or a year, 18 months, when we come back and do another radar on observability and we see how things change over time.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for adding that, John. You make a really good point that this is not supposed to be 100% objective. I don't even know if you can be 100% objective on this, but hopefully you can see at least from this roughly what kinds of companies and the size of companies that are represented. And this tech radar is really intended to be a guide for people as well. It's not supposed to say there is exactly one technology stack that's going to be perfect for you. Instead, it's more like, here are different things that these different companies are using. And if you're looking at a range of observability options right now, you could use this as more information to help you evaluate and prioritize what to evaluate. Okay, with that, I'm actually going to go into the numbers that we saw. So as I mentioned before, we're starting with assess. So the things where there were the least consensus. And so here we found there were three projects / tools in assess. And this bar chart represents the votes that people brought in. So the green is adopt, the bluey green is trial, and then yellow is assess. And then there's some gray for if they put it in hold as well. So John, maybe I can give you this to start with. Just any thoughts about these projects?
Well, the first thing I want to point out is that the observant might notice that OpenTelemetry is effectively a format, whereas Thanos and Kiali are like product software systems that you install and use. So it points out another interesting bit about the observability space. There was there are SaaS providers, there are open source software you can run locally, there are data formats and methodologies, and we decided to kind of make it a fairly broad, asking companies what are you using, and leaving it a fairly broad question just to see what people came up with. So you might notice there's some interesting, okay, how do you compare OpenTelemetry to Thanos? That's a bizarre thing, but again, this is more just what people are interested in using. So first of all, these are all relatively new systems, Kiali, I think, has maybe been around for a year, Thanos. So I think it shows that, what I posit from, at least from our experience, what I see is that newer open source projects in particular have interest in companies are checking them out, interested in, but we didn't see a whole lot of people who would put all their chips on that and commit this is a key part of our entire infrastructure. So I think, but these seem like some promising technologies that have shown general interest in the groups, and are worth spiking on, or at least following to see if they might be worthwhile for your organization.
Yeah, I agree. It's quite hard to compare. One's a standard, one's an open source project, one is, a project for specific other projects. So it is challenging to compare. Okay. In that case, I'm going to move on to the set of projects that were placed into trial. So a few more in this case. We have Jaeger, Splunk, Lightstep, StatsD, CloudWatch, and Sentry. Kunal, can I give this to you for thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So what you'll notice is there's a lot of tools here in the trial phase. What we noticed, of course, was one thing in there is that some of these tools got a significant number of contributions from the votes that came in, and a big fraction of those were actually people who successfully went on to adopt them. And so that's kind of what helped get these tools moved into a phase where we feel they're more in the trial phase with the end users who are using it. Some of these names are quite common and popular, and most people know about these tools as well. So there's a good amount of tools here that people have experience with using successfully for their observability needs.
Yeah, and I think that we're seeing tracing as a little bit of a newer thing, and so you can really see that here with OpenTelemetry, Jaeger, Lightstep, things like that, being a little bit more towards the bottom as organizations are starting to experiment with these tools and really get on board with them.
Do any of your companies use any of these projects?
We are big users of Thanos. I pay it.
Yeah, we use, so far we use Splunk, StatsD, CloudWatch, and a bit of Kiali.
So we also use
technically OpenTelemetry, since it's a format.
Yeah, we use a number of these tools as well that have been mentioned here.
I think if you're running on AWS, CloudWatch is something that you have to be familiar with, at least familiar with, and many organizations already sort of assessed what it can do and what it's capable of. And CloudWatch and StatsD are things that have been available for a long time. So people are also familiar with both of them.
Yeah, you can also, yeah. So we see some more maturity in these as well. So apparently Cheryl has just lost her audio, so she's asked one of us to say something. So as we can see, next we can move on to the. Let's see, can you advance a slide, Cheryl?
Yes.
Let's see. Oh, it's all gone to heck. Darn you, 2020.
Can we move on to the adopt?
Yes. Okay. So let me talk about it a little bit. So the adopt category is where we see products and technologies that are actually pretty well established. So things like Prometheus and Grafana and Datadog, Elastic, OpenMetrics, those all have been present on the market and providing tooling and solutions for a long time. And they are already pretty mature. Like people can use them and companies can use them and rely on them pretty extensively. So when we look at those, those are the tools I think that actually solve problems for people in reasonably good ways. And compared to the products and things that we have in assess and trial and assess seems to me like things that people are looking for solutions for in many cases, and are trying out those tools to check if they can actually solve those problems for them, and are hoping to get those solutions to solve those problems for them. And with Adopt, we can rely on those things and make sure that, and we're pretty certain that they will be reliable for people.
Cool, awesome. Thank you. I think my audio is back. So I appreciate the summary that you just gave. I think that's a really good summary. There were a lot more solutions that people gave answers for that were not listed here. So I think we had more than 30 in total. And I think we had to sort of choose how many we could actually fit onto one radar, just to not be overwhelming. So Jason, I'm going to ask you, how did you find creating the radar? Did you find it easier or harder than you expected?
Yeah, the just kind of proliferation of tools and vendors and projects in this space made it challenged. So just dovetailing right into what you just finished talking about. I think we looked at that as a blessing, like, oh, there's a lot of tools that'll be really helpful. But because there were so many tools, you know, that we know there were projects that CNCF end users are using, but we maybe didn't get any respondents that were using those tools. And so, you know, we can't make a judgment about that, you know, a tool that no one who responded is using, or if there was just very few respondents that were using it. So it was both a blessing and a curse, unfortunately. And that was, I think, the hardest part. And I think it made it a lot harder than we were anticipating going into it.
Actually, go on, Marcin.
I think that what I found interesting about it is that we found like clear, let's call them winners, and things that are in between, where they see clear adoption, but not across the board. Like with Prometheus and Grafana, it's pretty common everywhere or almost everywhere. But there are tools that have almost 100% of adoption, but on the smaller scale. And that was sort of interesting to me to see that there are tools that solve problems really well, seemingly, but are not as popular or widely adopted as things like Prometheus or Grafana. And it was difficult for us to then, you know, judge where they should land on the radar because we didn't want to necessarily promote a tool. Let's call it promote that is good but not widely adopted yet.
Yeah, one of the experiences I had is that we got information from the other end user communities, but in a lot of cases, it just ended up bringing up more questions for me. Like I wanted more, like there were several companies, like Zendesk included, that had like said that we're adopting like multiple, arguably competing products or thing, you know, with Prometheus and Datadog and Splunk all kind of as tools we've used. And I was wondering like, okay, you know, is one of them a legacy that you're moving on to the new one? Is it different teams, like is it different groups in the organization? It has different use cases. So it was this like wondering like what are all the various stories and the in-depth thing. And like the radar, we're trying to flatten everything into kind of a two-dimensional grid of like, you know, adopt, trial. So like trying to like wondering about all the stories involved here and the reasoning for things, but still trying to like, okay, we need to converge on a useful story instead of just like asking more and more questions. But it's really, really neat to see at least the feedback from the other people on this team and the information we got about the other end user community companies.
Yeah, I sort of came to this evaluation with open mind because we as an organization went through a pretty extensive process of evaluating what we actually want to do for the future. So we did POCs with open source tools, but at the end we decided to go with a SaaS provider. And I was very curious about what other organizations do and how they do it and what kind of tools they adopting for all those different use cases and data points that we now have to sort of keep track of. And the number of tools was sort of surprising to me, like how many tools there are that I was not aware of some of them.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about your thinking, Marcin, as you were doing that evaluation. Like, what are the things that you thought are important about choosing an observability solution?
So first it was maturity of the products that we were evaluating or wanted to run. The second part was, as an organization, do we want to invest in building our own ecosystem, observability ecosystem, or do we want to hand it over to someone that is probably better than us at it, even if we had to pay for it? We decided that we'd rather focus on building our own or helping our own business rather than learning all the things that other people already know and are experts at. And that was essentially it.
Yeah, one thing that Marcin just said that kind of triggered a thought in me is that, like, in the 5 years I've been at Zendesk, how we use observability tools have changed a lot. Like when I first joined, we had an ops team, and they were responsible for production, and they looked at graphs and dashboards and that sort of thing, and they're the ones on call. But we've now kind of morphed into an organization where, like, the product engineering or the teams that build the service monitor the service. So now, like, the entire engineering organization needs to interact with observability tools, and gets, they're like, individual teams are the ones getting paged or alerted, need to look at their SLOs and that sort of thing. So that, the scope of who this needs to work with, and in many cases, the use cases has, like, changed dramatically. So our tooling has needed to evolve to match that. So again, we don't have concrete data from this, but I imagine a lot of the companies in this group have kind of similarly gone through, like, changes and evolutions over time regarding that.
Yeah, it's worth noting as well, this is a snapshot in time. If we did this a year earlier or a year later, we would end up with something different. So it is worth noting this data was collected last month, so August 2020, and really reflects as people see observability right now. All right, so now I'm going to talk about the themes. So what things did you find interesting or noteworthy about what you saw? And the first one that the Radar team came up with was the most commonly adopted tools are open source. And I thought when I saw this, like, well, duh, right? Of course this is open source because everything is open source in this world, right? So Jon, maybe you can comment on why was this interesting?
Oh, yeah, I think, like you said, it's kind of unsurprising insofar as the end user group are a set of people who are, almost all of us are running Kubernetes, either managed or open source. So we've all kind of bought into the idea of open source, community supported, cloud provider supported technologies. So it kind of makes sense we would use other ones as well. But at least in our experience at Zendesk, at least, once you get to a certain scale of data and company, it takes a lot of effort and time to actually run a lot of these open source tools at scale. And it's easy to spin up in a weekend following a blog post and that sort of thing. So it's interesting to see that even at fairly large scales, a lot of these companies are investing the time and energy to run their own Prometheus clusters or Grafana, or and like manage the complexity there. And in many cases, rather than using a SaaS provider or paying someone to handle that stuff for it. Now, to be fair, some of the companies like Datadog and Splunk were in the upper range of commonly used. So I think while open source is most common, even amongst these 32 set of companies, there's a variety of approaches and financial trade-offs and work trade-offs that we've all taken.
Marcin, do you have thoughts?
Right. So it was actually very surprised to me that so many organizations are running those open source tools, like Jon said, probably at a bigger scale, because it's actually either opposite to what we did or how we evaluated our situation, or maybe those organizations didn't get yet to that point where they had an opportunity to evaluate what they actually want to do, and they just go with a flow. Like they started with, I don't know, Prometheus and Grafana, and as they are growing, they expand and the deployment of those tools. And that was very, very surprising to me at the beginning when we got the results.
Right, at New York Times and same with you at Zendesk, you both use SaaS products.
Yes.
For observability, right?
Yeah, I mean, or bus, we are a SaaS company, so we're all like, yeah, you know, SaaS is a good idea. Everyone should do that. But yeah, we like for a while, like logs, for example. For a while, we were running, for you know, way back in the day, we just had a log server that people used grep for, and then eventually moved to a system where we were like pushing logs to Kafka, and Kafka goes to an Elasticsearch cluster. But then we realized that Elasticsearch cluster was getting bigger and bigger, and we realized, okay, we either need to hire several engineers just to keep that up and running and tuned and scaled and that sort of thing like that, and that's expensive. Or we should try to find a SaaS provider to handle logs for us. And we looked at the cost of hiring people, the opportunity cost, the fact that we just figure a good SaaS provider would probably do a better job of managing logs than three or four or five engineers would do on our team. So we decided, okay, let's like take that money and give it to a provider. So we used Datadog in this case. But that was, it was a fair bit of like back and forth and trying to determine the like, okay, do it in-house versus like admit that's not our core competency and have someone else do it for us.
The other problem that we ran into was that we want engineering teams to be independent, but it came with a cost of them deploying and maintaining their own observability infrastructure, which again caused another problem where there was almost no transparency across the organization about how those systems perform or where those metrics are, where those logs are. And by adopting, one of our goals first was to consolidate everything. And with that, the next step was to use a SaaS provider to just give people tools and processes to adopt the platform. And it was easier than managing those the infrastructure for all those teams, especially that they had different use cases, different requirements. It would be difficult for us to handle it all at the same time.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And the trade-off between in-house and having a SaaS provider is something that every company struggles with or has to make a decision on. So I'm going to go to the second theme or pattern, which was that there's no consolidation within the observability space. Kunal, your thoughts?
Yeah, this one was actually very interesting from my perspective. What we noticed was that a large number of companies had actually given opinions on a large number of the tools that have been mentioned here, which means that they have actually tried and have experience with at least many of these tools. In fact, I think more than half of the companies are using, 5 or more tools that have been mentioned here, which is a lot of tools for observability. And so as the radar team was kind of looking at the data and trying to understand that, one of the things we realized was that the cloud native space is a very thriving community. There's a lot of interesting innovation that's happening here. And so there's a lot of new tools that are coming in that are looking to solve some of the problems as people build more cloud native systems. And so as these new tools are coming in that are solving problems, people are looking at those tools to try and understand how to use them. So I think that's kind of what makes a lot of people at least have some experience with these tools to be able to give some opinion on them. But I think the interesting thing that we also noticed was that a large number of these tools are actually being used on an ongoing basis. And part of the reason we think that's the case is because, um, observability itself is a very kind of interesting art. I mean, you will often hear people talk about observability in the sense of logs and metrics and tracing. So you're basically looking at a lot of data from a lot of different angles. And a lot of these tools have their strengths in one or maybe a couple of those, but not necessarily all of the dimensions in which you're interested in understanding your data. And so that's probably a contributing factor to people having to choose more than one tool in order to understand all of the data that's coming in and to be able to make observable decisions based on the data. And then finally, I think one thing that I think a couple of us had experience with on the radar team that I think contributes to this fact as well is a lot of us are not in the business of building observability tools themselves. Our core businesses are somewhere else. And so often once you make a choice for a tool and you invest heavily in adopting that tool, it becomes very hard to move into a different tool. Like the cost of investing to move completely from one system to another is pretty high. And often there isn't enough ROI to want to make that investment. And so that's kind of one of the contributing factors where once you adopt a tool, you tend to stay around with the tool, even though you might introduce another tool or give it a shot to see if it solves another problems, but you may not necessarily fully migrate off the old tool.
Yes. And sometimes it can feel that, every month or every quarter, there's a new way to do things, a new way to deploy your infrastructure or workloads. There is new platforms to deploy to. We went from from VMs to containers to cloud functions. All those things require different ways to observe your workloads and your infrastructure. And that comes with a cost of adopting yet another tool to do those things for you and yet another protocol or pattern. And it feels like a natural thing to go because the technology progresses and it requires us to try and assess things constantly. And there's just more and more things showing up on the market.
And I think that's probably one of the reasons why even kind of it ties together both the first and the second theme you'll see here is the fact that when you choose an open source format, it actually makes it easier for you to experiment with other tools or move on to a different tool.
Yes.
From at least that perspective. And so that's probably why more and more people gravitate towards using open standards as opposed to closed standards when they're choosing their tools.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So one of the things that we did, even though we adopted a SaaS platform, we still stayed with the open metrics for metrics because we do want to have flexibility to migrate somewhere else if we ever needed to, even if it comes with a higher cost of just running those systems.
Yeah, no, I would say that in the consolidation, even like with my experience at Zendesk, it's a constant conversation going on here about the relative value and use case of different tools. Like metrics, for example, like stats style metrics don't give you a whole lot of granular detail of exactly what happened, but so logs give you a lot more information, but they're more expensive and to take more space and sort of thing. And then there's distributed tracing, so like what. We kind of have like multiple ways of monitoring stuff, which is or close to, but have their own quirks. So what's the relative value and what is most useful to teams, trying to monitor systems to know if there are errors, to be able to troubleshoot things if an incident does occur. look at historical trends. So they all have these trade-offs. So we end up like running a couple of different tools in different, both for different use cases. And I think we're still experimenting. And you even see like, I think Slack came out with a blog post the other day about their, new, their system, what is it? Yeah, just tracing, and Netflix has their egg drifting. So it's a constantly churning domain with lots of really interesting technologies kind of constantly popping up.
Oh, and I see we have a comment from, I guess, one of the founders, maintainers of Open Metrics, who said that I think this is after Marcin, like that's in part why I started Open Metrics, to force metrics into a label-based system and then let the best one win. So he loves to see that it's being used and thought about as such. Which I think is a great comment.
Thank you, Richard, for starting that.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on these first two themes? We have one more to discuss. I also actually found this second one interesting compared to the first radar that I did, where it was fewer projects and sort of more easy to choose where it was. I felt like this one had a lot more projects and it was much less clear which levels they should fall into. Mm-hmm. And I was corrected that he's the founder. So I'm sorry, founder of Open Metrics. Okay, third theme, Prometheus and Grafana are frequently used together. Again, I thought, well, maybe this is obvious, but Marcin, maybe you want to tell us why this is interesting.
Like, it is not surprising, but it is also surprising that so many organizations are deploying this essentially as a bundle. And when we did run our own Prometheus with Grafana, any tutorial or any guide that you would, Google for answers, they both come hand in hand. Like if you're deploying Prometheus, you're essentially going with Grafana. Sometimes there is a mention of Graphite, but those two are like a bundle that come together. And even if you look at things like Helm charts or different deployment patterns for those systems, they both are bundled. And it may be that they just essentially work very well with each other and provide people with what they are looking for. And because it's so widely adopted, it is now easy to deploy and maintain them as a bundle, essentially.
Jason, do you want to add to that?
No, I think it makes a ton of sense, but it was really striking. You may not be able to see it in the radar the way that the data is presented there, but in looking in the responses, it was almost 100% kind of overlap. So everyone that was using Prometheus was also using Grafana, which was interesting. I don't think it was exactly 100, but it was close enough.
It was very close, yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Jon.
Oh, I just want to point out that at Zendesk, we've got like 1,000 engineers. We have a foundation team. We've got a vendor review board. But at the end of the day, usually when we are trying something out or doing the proof of concept, there's one engineer who is like Googling and reading blog posts to figure out, okay, how do I get this up and running on a test cluster or something like that. So the process that goes through initially is like the exact same as a hobbyist or a 3-person startup or something like that. So I think that all right, a couple of tools that fit together nicely and make it really easy to see value end to end. It's a lot easier to get to the point of like, oh, this is cool. I'm going to go tell my boss about this, and have it work up the chain. So I think that integrations like that are useful in the open source community wherever possible.
Kunal, if I remember correctly, you don't use Prometheus or Grafana, right? So Do you want to tell us why?
Yeah. So we got into the observability game, right around the time when we were starting to get into the Kubernetes side of the world as well. And when we started on that journey, Prometheus actually wasn't around, and so we made a bet on a different tool. We instrumented all of our systems, and today we have millions of metrics being emitted, and we have over 400 engineers in the company who are completely trained on the tool and understand how to use it. We have hundreds of dashboards, thousands of alerts set up. And so at this point in our journey, kind of to the theme number 2 that you see there, it's really kind of a lot of investment for us to move from our existing solution over to something like Prometheus or Grafana. And that's not just the cost for the like redoing all the work, but it's also like, keep in mind, we have to train 400 engineers on the new tool. There's going to be a brief period in time where we're probably going to live in 2 worlds, in the existing world and in the new world. And like going through that whole transition just seems like a lot of work. And we just don't see enough ROI in making that investment at this point. And again, it's not contributing towards our core business. It doesn't really buy us anything in terms of where our business wants to go. So that's kind of what's holding us back. If I were to start from scratch today, I'd probably go with Prometheus and Grafana, which are like the popular choices and where end users are today. But given where we are and what the investment we made so far, is just a very hard sell to make.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. And someone in the comments also said that we as Prometheus team deprecated Prom Dash in favor of Grafana in 2015 or 2016 as the officially recommended dashboarding tool. So I guess that was somewhat earlier on. And yeah, much harder to switch once you've built a few years of investment and tooling around one project. So putting that all together, this is basically what the final radar looks like. So in Adopt, we have these 5 projects: Prometheus, Grafana, Elastic, Datadog, OpenMetrics. In Trial, we have 6 here, and then 3 in Assess. And I'm going to ask each of our panelists just one thought or takeaway or something that you learned from going through this exercise. So Jon, can I start with you?
I think it was it was nice and somewhat validating to discover like so many companies use so many tools and are still like, it's not just us that has 3 or 4 different observability tools running at the same time, and we're all like sharing thoughts and ideas with the other people on the team, like, oh yeah, this is something that we all struggle with. And I think the value of talking to your peers and getting either to get like advice, commiserate, or just like have someone who has an opinion on this that isn't really biased and trying to sell you one thing one way or the other is really valuable to me.
Jason, you want to go next?
Yeah, this was a really, really fun process, and it really wouldn't have been possible without Cheryl and Julie's coordination. So big thanks, mad props to them for that. But I think my thoughts on the kind of the radar and the process and whatnot is that, yeah, I want to reiterate that there are a lot of tools, and unfortunately, because of kind of the subset of data that we have, we can't make judgments about tools that that subset of CNCF end users didn't use widely. So we know that there are a lot of good tools that kind of didn't make the cut because they didn't have the votes, and we couldn't make a judgment about them. So that's not a reflection of the quality of the projects that aren't, or the tools that aren't on here.
Yep, definitely. So after the last one, a few people asked me, how do I get my tool onto this? And I was like, you can't just add it if the data's not there, right? Like, it comes from these companies that we've spoken to. Marcin, thoughts, takeaways?
So I really, really enjoyed the process and the collaboration, and I'm happy that I was able to learn how other organizations do things. And as for the radar, I read it as there are things that do solve problems really well. There are things that solve problems well for some people. And there are tools or things that people hope to be solved for them in the future. Like when I think about open telemetry, it's something that we are excited about and waiting for. When I think about Thanos, when we did a POC with Thanos, we were really hoping for it to solve the storage problem for the metrics data for us. And as those things mature and get better, they have a chance to solve those problems really, really well. And people are anticipating them.
Awesome. I'm glad that you enjoyed the process. And Kunal, last word to you.
Yeah, so I will echo what the other panelists have said, and thank Cheryl and Julie and the entire CNCF team to help shepherd this whole thing. I think this is a very valuable effort. Also want to thank all the fellow panelists. I think it's been a lot of fun having these conversations and learning what everybody thinks about what's happening, and kind of trying to come up with some way to wrangle all of this data together to present in some meaningful way. I'm super excited actually to see the large number of tools and the various kinds of problems they solve here and how end users are using this. I think for me, it reflects really some of the challenges in running a distributed system in a cloud native way. I'm super happy to see the amount of interest and investment that's happening in the industry that's leading to newer and newer tools coming up that are looking to solve some of the problems that we as end users are facing in trying to build this kind of an architecture. So for me, like a big takeaway is that this observability landscape is pretty large. Lots of people looking to solve interesting problems here. So I would encourage both the people who are building and creating these tools to continue all the hard work that they're doing, and then the end users to share all of their feedback with CNCF and these and the creators of these tools, so that they can continue to iterate and make these tools better, so that we as end users can benefit from that.
That's a great summary. And also I want to say thank you to all of you for working with me on this. I've actually enjoyed the process a lot as well and learned a lot from all of you. So last thing to mention, we have a new website, radar.cncf.io, where you can go and see all of the information that we've just run through today. You can find the previous radars as well. If you want to get involved, I'd love to hear, what do you think the next topic, the next radar should be on? You can go to cncf.io/tech-radar. This is a GitHub issue where you can just vote on things that you think the next radar should talk about. If you want to come and contribute towards future radars, then please come and join the CNCF End User Community, where you can hang out with fantastic people like these people. Obviously, this is only for end users, so vendors are not allowed to join, but we would love to have you in the community. And lastly, if you just have general thoughts or feedback about how we can make this radar more interesting, more valuable to you, what else could we do, then just email info@cncf.io. We are pretty much out of time, so I'm sorry for not being able to have time for questions, but again, you can put stuff on this GitHub issue and I will go and check it out and answer afterwards. Thank you so much. I really appreciate everybody's time chatting today. And just the last things to wrap up. I want to say thank you to all of our presenters for coming and joining today. And the webinar recording and slides will be posted online later today. We look forward to seeing you at a future CNCF webinar. Thank you and have a great day.
Thanks, you all.
Thank you.